It is not just the stellar daisy. It is a question that has never been answered. How could a colossal floating fortress, a very large ore carrier, weighing nearly 300,000 tons and advertised as the unsinkable titan of the trade routes, collapse into a watery grave in mere minutes? Why did a system designed to defy the crushing pressure of the deepest oceans surrender to the microscopic betrayal of metal fatigue? And more importantly, why did 24 souls become the first victims of the very confidence they trusted to bring them home? But that is only the surface. Behind the moment, the steel giant broke its back and vanished. Lies another story less told, but equally dangerous about profit margins masking safety. The arrogance of conversion engineering, and a chain of small, ignored errors merging into history. Why did it all happen in the quiet spring of 2017, and what actually killed the stellar daisy? Was it the indifferent violence of the Atlantic, the sheer density of the cargo, or the human element, a decision made years ago in a boardroom? Stay tuned, because the truth about the stellar daisy is unlike any story you know. On March 31st, 2017, the South Atlantic Ocean was not a graveyard. It was a mirror. The sun hammered down on the equator, turning the endless blue water into a shimmering sheet of glass. Cutting through this tranquility was a beast of human engineering, the stellar daisy. She was magnificent in her scale. At nearly 320 meters long, she was larger than the Eiffel Tower, laid on its side a sprawling island of green and red steel, moving with a purpose. She was a very large ore carrier, a VLOC, the heavyweight champion of the maritime world. On this day, she carried a cargo worth 260,000 tons of iron ore, the red dust that built the skyscrapers of Asia. Inside the bridge, the air conditioning hummed a cool, artificial breeze, keeping the equatorial heat at bay. The atmosphere was professional, almost bored. The smell of strong coffee and the faint, sweet scent of ozone from the radar screens filled the command center. Captain Yu and his officers watched the horizon where the sky met the sea in a perfect, unbroken line. There was no storm. There was no rogue wave. The massive Hyundai-built engine beat with a rhythmic, hypnotic thrum, a mechanical heartbeat that vibrated gently through the soles of their shoes, reassuring them of the power they commanded. To the 24 men on board, 8 South Koreans, and 16 Filipinos, this ship was more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary. The mess hall echoed with the sounds of lunch being served, the clinking of silverware, and the easy laughter of men who knew the routine. They were weeks away from their destination in China, and the hardest part of the voyage seemed to be the boredom. The ship felt invincible, a fortress of iron pushing aside the ocean as if it were nothing more than mist. But the stellar daisy was not born this way. She had a secret history, a surgical past that the crew knew but perhaps did not fully fear. She began her life as a crude oil tanker, a vessel designed to carry liquid. Years later, in a shipyard seeking efficiency, she was cut open, gutted, and stitched back together as an ore carrier. It was a brilliant economic move, transforming an old single-hull tanker into a profitable dry cargo giant. The engineering diagrams promised that the new structure was sound, that the modifications were robust. The coffee in the mess hall sat perfectly still in the cups, a testament to the ship's stability, masking the fact that deep in the number 2 port wing tank, the steel frames were silently screaming under the weight of the iron ore. Life on board continued in this bubble of industrialized comfort. The chief engineer checked his gauges. The oil pressure was perfect, the temperatures optimal. The crew on deck maintenance painted over spots of rust, the sun warming their backs, the salt spray tasting fresh and clean. It was the definition of a smooth sailing day. The ocean, usually a chaotic adversary, seemed to be granting them safe passage. This was the seduction of the big ships. They were so large, so heavy, and so loud that they numbed the senses to danger. The sheer mass of the vessel created a false reality where physics seemed to apply only to smaller things. When you stand on a deck that spans 3 football fields, you do not feel fragile. You feel like a god. As the third officer logged the 10 p.m. position in the logbook with a steady hand, the rivets in the void space beneath the main deck began to stretch microscopic hairline fractures, widening just enough to let the first molecule of darkness in. The afternoon wore on, bathed in that golden oceanic light. The crew prepared for the evening shift. The smell of dinner began to waft from the galley garlic and rice. In the engine room, the massive pistons continued their relentless dance, driving the propeller, pushing the stellar Daisy closer to home, closer to paychecks, closer to families. There was absolutely no indication that the world was about to end. The horizon remained flat. The radar remained clear. The stellar Daisy sailed on a queen of the ocean, unaware that her crown was already broken. 13:20 local time. The illusion breaks. It doesn't begin with a warning alarm. It begins with a sound that defies the catalog of human industry. It is not an explosion. It is a sharp, deafening crack, like a gunshot magnified 1,000 times that tears through the humid air. On the bridge, the world tilts. The coffee cup that was sitting perfectly still a moment ago slides across the console and shatters against the bulkhead. The vibration is no longer the rhythmic thrum of the engine. It is a violent, grinding shudder. The steel floor beneath Captain Yu's feet feels suddenly soft, unstable. As the second officer reaches for the telegraph to cut the engines, the structural spine of the ship 200 meters forward snaps the first major girder with the volume of a thunderclap. List? We have a list to port. The panic is immediate, sharp, and cold. The stellar Daisy is leaning. 5 degrees, 10 degrees. The horizon, once a flat, comforting line, is now a diagonal slash across the windows. Gravity shifts. Walls are becoming floors. The crew scrambles, grabbing railings that are suddenly too high to reach. Down on the main deck, the horror is visible. The ocean isn't just outside anymore. It is forcing its way in. A massive geyser of water and red iron ore dust erupts from the number 2 port water ballast tank. It shoots into the sky, a dirty fountain of failure. The hull has breached. The ocean is pouring into the empty spaces that keep the giant afloat. Captain Yu barks, orders, his voice cracking against the rising noise of groaning metal. He tries to maneuver the ship to turn her into the wind to balance the load. For 30 seconds, the list stabilizes. The false hopes spike. The lights flicker but stay on. The engine is still running. The crew on the bridge exchange a glance, terrified but calculating. Maybe it's just a leak. Maybe the pumps can handle it. We are a supercarrier. We don't just sink. But physics does not negotiate with hope. At the exact moment the chief officer grabs the satellite phone to call for help, the ocean completes its surgery. The crack returns, but now it is a continuous scream of torture. The ship is not just leaking, she is breaking in half. The hull, weakened by the conversion from oil tanker to ore carrier, simply cannot hold the weight of the iron ore against the buoyancy of the water. The steel plates on the deck rip apart like wet cardboard. The stellar Daisy folds. Inside the bridge, chaos reigns. The angle is now severe 30 degrees to port. Standing is impossible. Men are sliding, tumbling into consoles and bulkheads. The text message, the final digital scream, is typed frantically on the ship's communication app Kakao Talk, sent to the Polaris shipping headquarters in Seoul. Water entering, ship listing, urgent. It is the last testament of the machine. the lighting system fails. The bridge plunges into darkness, illuminated only by the flashing red strobes of emergency alarms. The roar of the ocean is now inside the room. 2 sailors, able seamen. Acevedo, an ordinary seaman Baguio, are on the portside bridge wing. They are scrambling, clawing their way toward the life rafts. The wind is howling now, screaming through the rigging as the ship accelerates her death roll. They look back. The sight burns into their retinas. The massive deck of the Stellar Daisy is snapping upward. The bow and the stern are rising, meeting in the middle like a closing book. The monster is eating itself. Jump. Acevedo doesn't think. He throws himself into the void. The impact with the water is like hitting concrete. The ocean is not warm. It is a violently churning washing machine of foam, oil, and debris. He is spun around, tumbled, dragged down by the suction of the dying Leviathan. Under the surface, it is a soundscape of hell. The groan of 300,000 tons of steel twisting the implosion of air pockets, the shrieking of tearing pipes. The water is thick with iron ore dust, turning the ocean into a suffocating red mud. Acevedo kicks. His lungs burn. He breaks the surface, gasping for air, choking on salt water and fuel oil. He looks up. The Stellar Daisy is gone. In her place is a boiling scar of white foam and black oil. The silence that follows is heavier than the noise. The massive engines, the 22 men, the bridge, the mess hall, the coffee cups, everything has been erased. The sun is still shining. The day is still bright. Acevedo finds a piece of floating debris, a life raft that has inflated automatically. He drags himself onto the rubber floor, coughing up the ocean. He sees Baguio nearby and pulls him in. They sit shivering, soaked in oil, staring at the empty patch of Atlantic Ocean where a mountain stood 3 minutes ago. The watch on Acevedo's wrist is still ticking, marching forward into a future that 22 of his friends will never see. The silence that followed the sinking of the Stellar Daisy was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. For the 2 survivors, Acevedo and Baguio, the Atlantic Ocean returned to its role as an indifferent jailer. They drifted for 24 hours, tiny specks of biological heat in a universe of cold salt water waiting for a miracle. When the commercial vessels arrived, diverted from their own trade routes by the distress signal, they found only the 2 men and a scattering of debris. Life rings, oil drums, and splintered wood bobbed in the swell. But of the other 22 crew members, Captain Yu, the engineers, the cooks, there was no sign. The ocean had claimed them completely. The search radius expanded to thousands of square miles. Planes flew overhead and ships combed the grid, but the Stellar Daisy had taken her secrets into the abyss. As the search for survivors slowly turned into a memorial service, a different kind of search began on dry land. This was the resurrection, not of the bodies, but of the truth. Marine investigators, naval architects, and the families of the lost began to peel back the layers of the Stellar Daisy's history, and what they found was a blueprint for disaster. The investigation centered on a single terrifying word: conversion. The Stellar Daisy was a Frankenstein monster of maritime engineering. She had not been born a bulk carrier. She was launched in 1993 as a very large crude carrier, VLCC, a single-hull oil tanker. For 15 years, she carried liquid gold across the oceans. But in 2008, the rules changed. Single-hull tankers were phased out for environmental reasons. She was destined for the scrapyard, but steel is expensive, and greed is inventive. Instead of retiring the ship, her owners, Polaris Shipping, decided to surgically alter her. They cut into her hull, removed the massive oil tanks, and installed cargo holds for heavy iron ore. It was a massive engineering gamble. Oil is a liquid. It distributes its weight evenly against the hull walls. Iron ore is a solid, abrasive mountain of rock. When you dump iron ore into a ship, it sits in piles, creating intense, point-loading, massive stress on specific parts of the floor. To accommodate this new cargo, the engineers had to modify the ballast tanks, the water-filled spaces that keep a ship stable. In the Stellar Daisy, the original side tanks were converted into void spaces, or ballast tanks, but the structural reinforcements were not designed for the punishing rhythmic twisting of a heavy ore carrier in high seas. On the blueprint table, in the investigation room, the red ink of the structural analysis marked the intersection of frame 65 and the transverse bulkhead, a geometric point where corporate ambition intersected with the fatigue limit of steel. The investigators looked closer. They examined the Stellar Daisy's sister ships, other converted tankers in the Polaris fleet. What they found was chilling. On the Stellar Unicorn, another converted giant, they discovered cracks. Not scratches, but deep structural fractures in the deck plating and the hull frames. These ships were cracking open while still at sea. The metal was tired. It had been twisted and bent for 25 years, and the conversion had robbed it of its remaining resilience. The Stellar Daisy hadn't just hit a wave. She had shattered because she was already broken. But the world needed proof. The theories were damning, but the corpse was missing. The wreckage lay 401 meters down deeper than the resting place of the Titanic in the freezing darkness of the South Atlantic. In February 2019, nearly 2 years after the disaster, the resurrection entered its physical phase. The Seabed Constructor, a high-tech deep-sea salvage vessel, arrived at the coordinates. This was a machine of awe, equipped with dynamic positioning thrusters and remotely operated vehicles ROVs capable of withstanding the crushing pressure of the deep. The ROV descended. It was a long fall into the void. The temperature outside the lens dropped to near freezing. The light from the surface vanished, replaced by the artificial glare of the robot's floodlights. Down, down, down. Past the layers of marine snow into the midnight zone, and finally to the abyssal plain. The lights hit the bottom, and there she was. The Stellar Daisy was no longer a ship. She was a debris field. The hull was obliterated, torn into massive, twisted sections of green steel. The violence of the sinking was etched into every piece of wreckage. The bridge wing where Acevedo had jumped lay crumpled in the mud. The massive cargo holds were ripped open. Their contents spilled across the ocean floor like spilled blood. The ROV pilots had a specific mission: find the VDR, the voyage data recorder, the ship's black box. It was a needle in a haystack made of darkness. They scanned the silt, maneuvering the robot arm with surgical precision. Then a flash of orange. Buried in the sediment near the shattered remains of the navigation deck was the small cylinder-shaped capsule, the VDR. The robot arm reached out its hydraulic fingers, gently grasping the device. This small box held the ghost of the final minutes. It held the sounds of the alarms, the voice of Captain Yu, and the terrible groan of the dying ship. But as the ROV continued its survey, it found something else. Something that broke the hearts of the team watching on the screens above. It wasn't steel. It wasn't data. The ROV floodlights swept across a single orange work boot, resting upright in the gray sludge of the ocean floor, perfectly preserved by the pressure, waiting for a foot that would never return. The recovery of the VDR confirmed the nightmare. The data showed that the structural failure was catastrophic and almost instantaneous. The hull didn't fail because of a storm. It failed because it was structurally exhausted. The conversion had left the ship with a fatal flaw, a weakness in the wing tanks that could not withstand the hogging and sagging of the hull in the open ocean. The Stellar Daisy was not killed by the sea. She was killed by the decision to turn a tanker into a dry cargo ship without accounting for the true cost of the physics involved. The ocean simply exposed the lie. The ship was a tired old workhorse, forced to run a race it could not win, and when its heart finally gave out, it took 22 men with it. The investigation revealed a systemic betrayal. The classification societies, the inspectors, the company, multiple layers of safety nets had failed. They had signed off on a ship that was literally coming apart at the seams. The golden dream of Act 2 was revealed to be a rust-covered gamble played with human lives. The Stellar Daisy is gone, but her ghost still patrols the shipping lanes. In the wake of the disaster, the industry shuddered. The tragedy forced a reckoning. Polaris Shipping eventually scrapped many of its converted ore carriers, admitting silently what the ocean had shouted violently, that you cannot cheat physics forever. But as long as global trade relies on moving mountains of raw material across hostile oceans, the risk remains. We build bigger ships, we push them harder, and we calculate safety margins to the decimal point to save $1 on fuel or steel. We treat these massive machines as immortal assets, forgetting that they are fragile skins of metal floating on a chaotic, hungry force. The ocean does not care about our profit margins. It does not care about our engineering degrees. It waits. It tests every weld, every rivet, and every decision made in a boardroom thousands of miles away. Today, if you sail to the coordinates 34 Fouts at 18 degrees Central, you will find nothing but blue water. The sun still shines on the equator. The waves still roll with indifferent rhythm. But 3 kilometers down in the eternal midnight, the twisted steel of the Stellar Daisy rests as a monument to arrogance. And somewhere in that darkness, the silence is absolute. It is the silence of 22 men who trusted the steel, and the silence of a world that promised them it was safe. Nature always wins. It is just a matter of time. History is not just dates and numbers. It is the collective memory of our species. Thank you for taking the time to remember these events with us. If you have a story or an event you believe deserves to be told, leave it in the comments. We are listening